Anbernic's XX line has really come a long way. From its humble beginnings as a Miu Mini Plus clone, the RG35XX was a fun if flaky device, made even better by the Plus model, which is really where it all began. Anbernic's idea was pretty simple. Use a reliable and cheap platform, with performance enough to play every retro game under the sun, and then a little bit more in the form of Dreamcast, Saturn, and N64. Max out PlayStation 1 and below, and then simply offer their customers as many possible options with that platform as possible. And in some ways, the XX line has become a market unto itself. Cheap, quality, and reliable handhelds for everybody. Whether it was a teeny tiny candy bar like the RG28XX, or the trendy square-screened Cube XX, or for those who wanted a bigger screen, there's the RG40XX, or the RG40XXV. There are a ton of these handhelds to choose from, which causes some people to cry market saturation, or simply too many handhelds. But really, I think that Anbernic was onto a winning idea here. Just offer something reliable, something cheap, something to serve everybody at a decent price. But really, all of that comes down to this handheld here, the RG35XX Pro. The 35XX Pro takes that original small vertical form factor of the 35XX Plus and basically just whacks two analog sticks at the bottom. And even though the 35XX Pro is not an exciting handheld, or an innovative handheld, or a handheld that does pretty much anything new, I can't help but think that this is probably one of the greatest handhelds that has ever hit the market. And it's not known yet whether this will be the final XX line device, but if it is, I think that this is an excellent swan song for that lineup. I want to say a big thanks to Anbernic for sending me the RG35XX Pro to review. This is actually my first time working with them directly and I really appreciate it. Regardless though, my usual standards are still in place. They haven't seen this review before it's gone live, nor do they have any influence over it. If you watched this review and you like the look of the Pro and you want to pick one up for yourself, please do use my links, which you'll find in the comment box and the description box below. It helps out the channel at no extra cost to you and I'd greatly appreciate it. As for the specs, pretty much everything is as you would expect here. It has a 3.5-inch screen, the perfectly capable H700 chipset, a 3200 mAh battery, Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, mini HDMI, vibration motors, and well, that's pretty much it. By all accounts, this is an XX device that does absolutely nothing new. But as we all probably know, the XX line isn't really about doing anything new. It's just about iterating on, or creating new versions of that same base platform. And it just so happens that taking that classic RG35XX device and adding analog sticks on the bottom is just a purely joyous experience. First of all, something that Anbernic has really done over the last couple of years with these handhelds is that they've absolutely nailed the controls, where it really matters the most. And the controls on the 35XX Pro are no exception. The D-pad here has always been one of Anbernic's strong points, and it's just as good here as it ever has been. It's a membrane connection that pivots well on the center point, and has very little in terms of ghost inputs. It rotates accurately around the center, and you can pull off fireballs or moonsaults with no problem at all. The face buttons are glossy, and also use a membrane connection that's thunky and chunky and honestly just feels great. And I've owned nearly all of these XX devices at this point, and the face buttons on the 35XX Pro do stand out to me as just being slightly better than all the others. It's like they just tuned them to perfection this time. I gotta say, I just love these glossy face buttons, they feel absolutely great. They're a great size, and the labels look good too. If I had one really minor complaint, it would be that when you need to tap a button repeatedly and quickly, it's not the fastest response in the world. But I have not had a single problem with this at all, so I wouldn't get too hung up on it. A welcome change to the 35XX Pro is that Anbernic has actually put in a minuscule amount of effort on the start, select, and menu buttons. Gone are those ultra snappy, crispy buttons that felt cheap and were kind of embarrassing to push in public. Anbernic have replaced those with really nice membrane connections, as it should have always been. It's just that tiny amount of effort that makes the 35XX Pro just that little bit better. Of particular note, I love the start and select buttons. They're kind of a softer plastic that just feels very retro and very classic. And before we talk about these sticks, I just want to continue the praise of the buttons on the Pro here, because even the volume keys and the power and reset button have all been given a little bit more attention than usual. They use very light and quiet micro switches, and none of them are loud or obnoxious, which is just great. The only exception to that rule is the shoulder buttons on the back. Anbernic has had plenty of time to perfect these shoulder buttons, and I think they pretty much have done in terms of the shape. Of course, with a vertical handheld and inline shoulders, they're not going to be the most comfortable or ergonomic in the world. but the slanted shape and the ski slope form factor really speaks for itself. It feels absolutely great. What's not quite as great is the clickiness, because the shoulders uniquely are kind of clacky, and there's a kind of hollow resonance when you tap on them. Again, it's not the worst I've ever heard by any means, but it's kind of noticeable in an otherwise pretty quiet and nice feeling handheld. Well anyway, let's talk about these analog sticks. These are just your typical Nintendo Switch style sticks that Anbernic has been using for years. And even though they've paid so much great attention to everything on this handheld, I guess they just didn't to the sticks, because yes, they still have that cardinal snapping issue. This is a driver or firmware based issue that is fixable, and there are already custom firmwares out there that fix the cardinal snapping. In case you don't know, that's when you rotate the stick around 360 degrees and it usually snaps to 4 or 8 directions. It's basically just a lazy implementation, and it's honestly frustrating that Anbernic hasn't fixed it in this handheld. But whatever, to be honest, I'm just gonna let it slide this time, because it's ultimately a fixable issue. The sticks click down for L3 and R3, and again I think that these could be a little bit softer. They're just a loud clack. All it takes is just a little bit of foam behind the stick to fix this, but whatever, again I'm not gonna get too hung up on it. The only other points of interest on the 35XX are the dual SD card slots, one for your operating system and one optional for games. On the bottom you'll find your downward firing speaker, which I'll just tell you right now is completely fine. It's not amazing by any means, but it works just fine on a handheld like this. And on the top of the device you'll find your 3.5mm headphone jack, a mini HDMI port, and a USB-C port for charging and OTG peripherals. The 35XX Pro is lightweight in the hand, and despite having the extra chin on the bottom containing the analog sticks, it feels to me just as compact as that original 35XX. Don't get me wrong, it is bigger than that, but I don't really notice it. And that's because I find this device to just be wonderfully compact. Because Anbernic have just cramped your full gamepad layout on a vertical handheld, and they've done it in a way that's both compact and comfortable. Of course we've had vertical handhelds before, even with dual analog sticks. But still, the 35XX Pro just feels kind of special, because of how compact it is, while still giving you a full modern gamepad layout. The theme of this device is really familiarity, because if you've had one XX device, you probably know what to expect here. And the software experience is no exception. Here you have Anbernic's typical operating system, which some people like and some people don't. I personally think it's fantastic, and it's only gotten better over time. Sure, it's a little bit clunky, but then every time I find myself saying that, I wonder why I've said it, because I think it's perfectly functional. The only real huge problem with it is that analog stick snapping. It's just such a stupid and avoidable problem that I wish Anbernic would just take 5 minutes to fix their driver. But anyway, all that aside, this is just the usual Anbernic stock operating system experience. If you want a deep dive on that, check out my 35XX H review, in which I go into a lot of detail not only about how it works, but also why I like it. It makes it really easy to browse for and jump into your games. There are some pretty decent defaults in terms of bezels and overlays, and plenty of ways to customize your experience just to your preferences. But really, I like this operating system just because of how simple it is to jump in and out of a game. I've never really felt the desperate need to install a custom operating system on an XX device, but I know that there are great alternatives out there. The screen on the 35XX Pro is familiar as well. It's pretty much the same display that we've seen on the 35XX Plus and the H and all of those other 3.5-inch devices. And I think it's absolutely fantastic. The 640 by 480 resolution is perfect for retro gaming, and gives you a full screen experience in most retro systems. It also looks great for more squarish systems like Game Boy and Neo Geo Pocket, but it doesn't do quite as well in something widescreen like PSP or WonderSwan. It's not to say those systems are unplayable, but this just really isn't the ideal style of device for those systems. And by the way, why have Anbernic made every form factor for the XX line under the sun except a 16:9 handheld? I feel like that's kind of a missed opportunity. But then again, what would I play on it? Basically just WonderSwan. Anyway, moving on. The colors are vibrant, the screen is sharp, and there's really no complaints I have whatsoever here. Except for maybe how the screen kind of bubbles up at the edges, so it makes it impossible to apply a screen protector. Or at least a screen protector that doesn't just kind of sit on top. When you're in-game, the 35XX Pro is just, like, fine. It's not a mind-blowing experience, but I don't think it's supposed to be. It's just a really, really consistent, reliable, and enjoyable one. Playing retro games with the D-pad and face buttons feels great. In fact, I think it feels better than it did on the 35XX Plus, because the extra chin, even though you're not using the analog sticks, just allows for a better grip. And of course the shoulder button shapes have been improved as well. Once again, this just showcases Anbernic's slow and iterative improvements on these devices. And like I said before with the controls, everything just feels amazing here. It's pretty much the perfect retro gaming style of control, and feels very similar to an old Super Nintendo controller or something like that. The analog sticks, once again ignoring the cardinal snapping, and they are positioned close enough to the D-pad and face buttons that you don't have to alter your grip substantially to use them. They're not the absolute best for dual stick gameplay, and certainly not for dual stick and shoulder gameplay, but you're probably not going to be playing too many games like that on this anyway. But when you do want to play them, for example if you're playing Dreamcast, or a DualShock PlayStation game, they're just absolutely great. And it's so nice to have a small Game Boy-like vertical handheld with these dual analog sticks. Once again, there's just something really joyful about it. And I think that this extra flexibility is really what gives it an edge over the original 35XX Plus. In terms of performance, you're going to be playing every retro game under the sun up to and including PlayStation 1 with no issues whatsoever. You can even turn on enhanced resolution for PS1 and everything's going to run great. The same can be said for Nintendo DS, which, if you're playing a game that doesn't rely on touch, microphone, or dual screens, offers an extremely fun experience. I just adore playing Ridge Racer DS on these devices. It's just such a cool experience. When you get to your higher end systems, there is plenty that will work well. For example, 2D Sega Saturn games usually do well, and there are quite a few Dreamcast games that will work too, such as Sonic Adventure 2. It always surprises me how well this chip runs Sonic Adventure 2. You get a full speed experience like 99% of the time. But Dreamcast is really where this device caps out, and you're going to start seeing slowdown in games like Dead or Alive 2. Things get a little sluggish when you move over to N64, and it's not just because there's basically no real 2D games on N64. It's just that it's a little bit too heavy for this chip. Even when you find games that do work like Diddy Kong Racing, you're going to be finding a lot of slowdown at the same time. But hey, I'm not buying this device for N64. By the way, if you want to play GoldenEye, not only are you going to be struggling with slowdown, but you'll also find it impossible to aim because of the analog stick snapping. So if you want to play a game like this, you're definitely going to need to use a custom firmware. Wait a minute, this isn't even GoldenEye. PSP is really the last system that this device can play, and it can't really play it at all actually. If you get this handheld preloaded, you're going to get a bunch of minis, which pretty much sums up the performance here. It's not very good at all. But also the 16:9 aspect ratio doesn't look great on this 3.5-inch 4:3 aspect ratio screen. Now I found out recently that you can actually get some cheats and hacks for some PSP games that make them work better at this aspect ratio, and so you might have some good luck with those. But still, for PSP the performance is never quite there in my opinion. Overall, the gaming experience on the 35XX Pro is absolutely stellar. It's amazing for retro games, and it still gives you all the flexibility of a dual analog stick layout. You are going to absolutely love playing Ape Escape on this device, just like you're going to love playing, I don't know, DuckTales. And most importantly, the retro gaming experience has not been sacrificed to add these analog sticks on here. When it comes to comparisons, I think there's one specific device that the 35XX Pro should be compared to, and that's the 35XX H, which, not surprisingly, is my other favorite of the 35XX devices. In fact, these two are practically identical, except the H is horizontal, and this one is V. In fact, I wonder if they should have just named this the RG35XX V. Because as I've heard a few people mentioning, the Pro naming is kind of weird. I think it's called Pro because it's a Pro over the Plus because of these analog sticks, if that makes sense. Anyway, comparing this to the H, like I said, they're pretty much identical. The same screen, the same controls, the same operating system, the same performance, and really I would say that these two handhelds are the ultimate handhelds in the XX line, because both of them perfectly give you that retro gaming experience, while also giving you a full control layout, and also while still giving you the compact experience of the 3.5-inch screen. I usually prefer horizontal layout handhelds, but I think the 35XX Pro really takes it for me this time. Maybe it's just the novelty of such a tiny and compact device with the dual analog sticks, or maybe I just genuinely really love it. But regardless, the 35XX is just a fantastic handheld. While being at risk of repeating myself here, I want to reiterate that the 35XX Pro is not a standout device. It does absolutely nothing new, it's not very creative or innovative or anything like that. But I think that to expect that from this device is kind of misguided. I don't think this is supposed to be anything particularly special. I think it's just the ultimate iteration on the XX line. We started the XX line with a 3.5-inch vertical handheld, and we've gone through multiple iterations of controls, form factors, and everything else under the sun, before finally circling back around to that vertical form factor. Only this time the controls have been perfected more or less, the little kinks and details have all been worked out, and we've gotten all the flexibility of the dual analog sticks. So whereas I think the 35XX Pro isn't surprising, I do think it is just flat out a phenomenal handheld. And if it really is the final XX device, I think it's an absolutely perfect note to end on. The ultimate version of where we started.